Well, I was really intrigued by the topic that Pastor Tim gave me. This is not usually the way that I would start off this sort of series or talk, but by talking about culture and religion. So I've been reflecting on this and putting together an outline. It's something I've been thinking about and studying, of course, for many years. If you want all the academics and everything, I'll tell you all that stuff. I have a PhD and all those little letters and stuff, but that's not really what I'm interested in. But what is culture? Anyone know where I'm very interactive, so I expect you to answer my questions. Where does the word culture come from? What is the etymology of the word? David, you know this. Okay, no, don't. Where does the word culture come from? Does anyone know? From Latin. Okay, well, the Spanish, cultura, and culture, they're from the same Latin root. Cultus, a cult. Cult. So the worship, the idea is that cultures in primitive times grew from communities that had a common cult or a common worship of one deity or one set of deities, gods, spirits, or what have you. So right there we can see historically and etymologically in the history of the word a link. Okay, that's the last time I'm going to say etymology during this talk. Okay. Well, what is a culture? What does it mean to be within a culture? What does it mean to be a cross-cultural minister, which is usually the title that we use? Well, I have a definition of culture to begin with, and it's a comprehensive worldview through which one perceives and interacts with the outside world. That means is that a culture is like a lens. The lenses in my glasses, they're working correctly when I don't notice them. And that's how cultures work. Cultures are all these presuppositions. It's like a lens. And everything you look at in the world, you look at relations and power and politics and questions of God and rights and law. And because of your culture, you can look at these things and make sense of them. So we have this culture, and because of this, we have these presuppositions. This means that we have these beliefs that we've never thought about. We haven't considered them. We haven't stopped to say, wait, is that really true? It is part of our world view. Americans have a lot of presuppositions. In my time in the Muslim world, one of the presuppositions, something that people just believe without thinking about it, is that Muhammad is a prophet. I remember we were living in Jordan studying Arabic, and during Ramadan, I just thought, I'm just going to ask people, like, why do you believe in Muhammad? I'm not being antagonistic or anything, but just why do you believe that this guy's a prophet? It seems like you can make a case that he's not. And people say, well, because the Quran is from God, it says he's a prophet. Well, why do you believe in the Quran? Because it's from Muhammad and he's the prophet of God. It's like the circular reasoning. But the point is, and I'm not trying to make fun of anyone, but the point is, it's just something that people believe. It is just a presupposition. It is something that you don't have to think about. You just know it's true without thinking about it or without reflecting on it first. So our cultures allow us to interpret reality, meaning, value. For instance, our cultures tell us what a good life looks like. What does it mean to be successful? Well, our cultures give us an image. Some cultures say, well, it means that people respect you and you have honor. Other cultures say, well, it means that you're powerful and wealthy, which probably wealth is related to power. Of course, it's a form of power, but they're not the same thing. What does the Christian faith say about a good life? It offers a whole different vision. So we're going to find sometimes that our cultural background in terms of this country and the Christian vision of life, sometimes they don't meet up. Yes, David?
I know what a successful life means.
What is it?
It means you fulfill your telos.
Fulfill your telos, that's right. Little Aristotelian philosophy that I teach my kids. So, another thing that culture does is it tells us what has value and what doesn't have value. And it tells us about how to order society. So let me give you a couple of assumptions that I listed. I was reflecting on this today, putting together this outline. Here are a couple of things that Americans, not all of them, but they tend to believe without ever having really thought about it. First, diversity is good. Who doesn't believe that diversity is good? Okay, Americans tend to just believe this pretty reflectively. That means without thinking about it. It's just something that people have always been taught and they know it. Another one is meritocracy. That you choose the person for the job who has merited, who has earned the job. You don't choose the person for the job who is your cousin, right? You don't choose the person for the job who is nice and funny, even though they're probably not going to do a great job at the job. You choose the person who has merited it. This is another part of, it's a cultural assumption we have. Another presupposition that characterizes parts of American culture is the rule of law, right? The idea that the law should treat all people the same way. That's why in the American tradition, other traditions as well, justice, when you see the statue of Lady Justice, what is she wearing? Why is she wearing a blindfold? And she has a scale, right? But why is she wearing a blindfold?
No, she's not judging based on how someone looks, I guess.
That's right, because she's blind, right? She's blind. She's not looking at people and saying, "Oh, this guy's important. This guy has money. This guy's attractive," right? Or this person, not from an important family, not wealthy, you know. As a judge, what's going to help me in the long term is getting on this person's right side, so I'm going to find in their favor. So this idea of rule of law, that you don't settle problems on your own, and that justice is blind, again, this is one of these cultural presuppositions. By the way, I'm not saying that any of these are either wrong or right. I'm just trying to describe things that most people in this country, whatever their ethnic background may be, tend to believe are true without ever, again, having really thought about them. One person, one vote. Have you ever thought how silly that must sound to most of the world? Why is it that I, who have a PhD, I get one vote, just like the person who didn't finish high school? Like, how does that make any sense? Why is it that Pastor Tim, who is a great man of God and virtuous and everything, he gets one vote, just like the guy who was over at the bar at 11 o'clock in the morning? Why is that? You should see how for most people in the world that doesn't make a lot of sense. Yet it is part of the presuppositions that we tend to have within this culture. Another thing that Americans tend to believe, and this one is really problematic now, is that religions are essentially good. We tend to believe that any religion that is practiced correctly is going to result in good things. We don't have any empirical evidence for this. We've never really thought about it. It's just something we believe. Why is that? Another aspect of American culture that people just tend to believe without having thought about it is that you choose your own life, right? In much of the world, if your dad was a carpenter, then guess what? You were going to be a carpenter. This is why we have all these family names with trade names like Miller, right? A lot of people have these names. But no one is going to say, well, your father was a shopkeeper, so you have to be a shopkeeper. We have this tradition of individualism, that the individual has to figure out what is going to be fulfilling and good for him or herself. And then finally, we also have this assumption of separation of church and state. Again, especially from the point of view of the Muslim world, and we're really going to jump into Islam in the coming weeks, not so much today. But why would you want to do this? If you have a divinely revealed code describing how society is supposed to function, then why, for heaven's sake, would you want to entrust the making of laws to Congress in Washington, D.C.? Right? Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to separate church and state? So again, I'm not saying any of these are good or bad or anything like that. I'm just trying to describe the fact that culturally we tend to have presuppositions. Another aspect of culture that I think is really important and interesting is that culture is bound up with symbols. What's a symbol? Well, I said I wasn't going to say etymology. I'm going to tell you the word history of the word symbol. It's from Greek. It means to cast or to throw two things together. You're taking two things that don't necessarily have a relation and you're putting them together such that they have a new meaning. A new meaning. So think, for example, of colors. Colors are significant. What is the regular color of mourning here in San Antonio, or in the United States in general?
Black.
Black, right? Whereas, if you were in India and you went to a funeral, what would you wear? White. Why? What's the significance of this? Well, it's an example of a color. Black or white don't have any significance in and of themselves. But in certain contexts, they have a meaning that is disclosed and that is related to that culture. I'll give you another example of symbolic language, standing. So in a lot of churches, historically and indeed today, people, when the reading of the gospel takes place, people will stand up. And then, when the reading of the gospel is done, they will sit down. Okay? Now again, I'm not saying that every church should do this or not, but I'm saying this is an example of symbolic language. Why? Why would people stand for the gospel reading when they sit down for much of the rest of the service?
Respect.
Respect. Exactly. It's a sign of respect. Well, we have a couple of other examples as well. I recently came back from Zambia in Africa. Think about even how there's symbolic significance to even the shapes of the human bodies. So, for example, here in the United States, if someone is overweight, we usually think, oh, they should exercise more, they lack discipline, or whatever. Or maybe they have some sort of metabolic problem, whatever. And if someone is really fit, we think, oh, that's good, that person is healthy. We tend to think like this. But again, that's a cultural presupposition. Did you know that in parts of Africa, if you see someone who is really thin and strong, they'll think, oh, that person is poor, and that's why they have to work hard, and that's why they don't have any body mass. Whereas a woman who's got some good body weight, they think, oh, that's good. She's healthy, she's wealthy, otherwise she wouldn't be able to do that. She'd have to be out, carrying water miles and miles every day, and she wouldn't be like that. So even questions of the human body have this significance in terms of these cultural symbols. Even letters have symbolic reference. A, just the letter A. It's good, right? It's A-okay. It's an A on your essay. F, bad. S, forbidden, right? So, this is another example of all the different symbols we have. Right now in the news, there's a huge debate about one of these national symbols, right? Related to football. What am I talking about? The guy who will not stand and put his hand over his heart at the singing of the national anthem. Standing, sitting, where you put your hands, these don't seem to have any kind of intrinsic value. But the fact is that symbolically, within the context of the game at that time, with that song, it matters because it is all wrapped up in culture. The Christian faith also has some very powerful symbols. The cross is a symbol that is almost universally recognized. Historically, what is the cross? Historically, it was a way for the Roman Empire to kill people. That's what it was, historically. Yet for Christians today, what does it represent? It represents the church, the community of Jesus. It represents hope. If it's a crucifix with Jesus, it's the love of God, that he would suffer and die on a cross. If it's just a cross, a blank cross, maybe the resurrection of Christ, the cross is empty. But all of these are positive things. Another important symbol is a loaf of bread, right? If you go to H-E-B and you just see a loaf of bread, You don't think anything. Well, what if you had come in here and you had just seen even this table, right, which is not particularly religious or ritually loaded, but what if you saw just a loaf of bread on it? Just the fact that it's within this context, you would think, oh, maybe someone is going to celebrate communion or the Lord's Supper. It has that significance. Well, let's talk about religion then. What is religion? What do we mean by this word? It's a personal or institutional set of values, beliefs, and practices. You should just right away note that overlaps and possibly even clashes with what we saw about culture. We're going to get to that in a minute. And these values, beliefs, and practices are related to or manifest faithful devotion to an ultimate reality. That could be the gods, that could be the spirit of the universe, or, as in the case of Islam and Christianity, it could be a personal God, a deity, an all-powerful God who hears us, listens to us, is concerned with human history in our lives, has revealed to us how we are to live, and so on. But here's really is the key question, and this is something that missionaries and cross-cultural workers have been thinking about for centuries. How can we untangle culture and religion? Can this even be done? There is a biography of one of the very first Turkish converts that I read some time ago. And at that time, being Turkish meant being Muslim. And he had grown up a Muslim and was quite devout. But he decided that he was going to become a Christian. This is all the way back in the 19th century. And he told this to one of his friends. And his friend said, well, what are you going to do? Become Greek? Because what was he thinking? To be Turkish is to be Muslim. And here he was saying, no, I'm going to continue being Turkish, but I'm going to be Christian. So he was introducing a new way of thinking into this question. So can we untangle religion and culture? Let me talk about one of the main symbolic or ritual interactions that we're used to in this cultural milieu, which is marriage. What are some of the main things that we do at weddings? Even church, good church Christian weddings with the pastor or the priest. What are some of the things that we do? What are some of the rituals or symbols?
Throw rice.
Okay, throw rice. Very good.
Say vows.
Say vows. Good. Stephanie?
The rings.
The rings, right? These rings. If I take off this ring, does it make me unmarried? No. But people are like, what's up, man? Why do you take off the ring? Right? Good. What else?
Kiss the bride.
Kissing the bride. Good.
The father gives the woman away.
The father gives the woman away. Excellent.
The veil.
The veil. There's one particularly bizarre culture that you Americans have.
White dress.
Not the white dress. The white dress, in many cultures, white is for purity, okay? David?
Throwing the bouquet into the crowds.
Throwing the bouquet, okay, that's like, throwing the bouquet into the crowds, right? A mild form of divination, right? What's a wedding without divination, right? Who's going to get married next? I'm talking about feeding each other cake. What does this symbolize? When is the last time that somebody fed you food? When is the last time somebody put food in your mouth? You, sir. When's the last time someone put food in your mouth?
Probably when I was about this tall.
Okay, good. And so you're done with that?
Yeah.
Older.
Forever?
Until I'm really old.
Until you're really old. This is actually the point that I'm getting at, right? It signifies vulnerability, right? You wouldn't normally let somebody just put food in your mouth, okay? Let me tell you, and so we have all these associations, we think that's a good Christian wedding. Now you can have those things without the Christian elements, but in a good church wedding, we would normally see all of these different things. Has anyone ever been to a Christian wedding in the Greek Orthodox or the Greek Catholic Church? Yes? What do they do? Do they exchange rings, if you remember?
I don't remember. It was in Chicago, but it was forever.
It's like 3 hours. It has a lot of things that they do.
I've got no problem hanging out in the Middle East, but I'm not going to go to Chicago. Because, that's some dangerous stuff, right? Yeah. Do you know they don't exchange rings? It's called the secret or the sacrament or the mystery of the crowns. And they place crowns on each other's head. Is that somehow less Christian? No. It signifies something different. What does the hand mean symbolically? The hand is work, right? The hand is work. But placing a crown on someone's head, I am crowning you king of my life, queen of my life. So, neither one of these is in and of itself better than the other one. Although the crown one is a lot more dramatic, by the way. But neither one of these is better than the other one, but they signify different things. But what am I trying to get at is the relation between Christianity and culture. We are quite used to thinking that the cultural things that we have tied to the marriage ceremony, holy matrimony, are the Christian things. Yet here's an example from a church, a tradition that's probably a lot older than the American tradition, by the way, that is very different, but every bit as beautiful and powerful. So, I like that. I like that example of diversity within the Christian faith and a very different cultural practice. There is no normative Christian culture. What do I mean by normative? Normative means that it sets the rules for everybody else. That's what I mean. There is no one Christian culture that is the paradigm or the example for all other cultures in the world to follow. And this is especially challenging for Americans to remember because we're so big. Even though, as Pastor Tim rightly said, we no longer live in a Christian society that is just by default Christian. But we still are a large church altogether. We're a wealthy church. We're an immensely powerful church, even if we don't see it ourselves sometimes. So it's important for us to remember that we are not the normative example or the normative pattern for Christianity. The Christian message, as it has existed historically, and even in the New Testament, even in the Bible, is always already clothed in a culture. There is no such thing. This is a quote that I love from Leslie Newbegin. He wrote a fantastic book called The Gospel in a Pluralist Society, which I read when I was in college, when I was like 19 studying philosophy at UTSA. And then I reread it last summer when I was in Turkey doing some teaching and research. And it was every bit as powerful. And this guy was from, I think, Scotland. And he went to be a missionary bishop in India. And he was there for decades. And he became a bishop in what's now the Church of South India. And then he went back to the UK after 40 years. And he said, I feel like I'm a brand new missionary in a whole different society that I've never even seen before, because it had changed so much. And he says, there is no such thing as the gospel pure and simple. The gospel, the Christian message, is always clothed in cultural clothing. However, we have to take that and balance it with the fact that there is no normative Christian culture. So what's the interaction then? What's the interaction between the gospel and culture? Well, first of all, the gospel can challenge cultural practices. An example of this that I heard one time was from Africa. In Africa, in a particular tribe, if somebody had twins, then people would assume that this was from witchcraft, and they would kill the twins, right? This seemed like, from their point of view, within their cultural matrix, a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But the Christian message, as it was trying to clothe itself within their cultural matrix, said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. That is not acceptable. Here is a cultural practice you have to leave behind. Second, the Christian message can simply permit cultural practices that exist and say, you know what, we don't really have, or the Christian message doesn't really have any kind of evaluation, either positive or negative, of that. So in certain cultures, for example, it was a mark of holiness to have long hair or long beard, and the Christian message said, well, that's fine, you don't have anything to say about that. As this man would attest right here. Looking fantastic. Looking like my good friend Basilios, the Orthodox priest in Nazarene.
We know him well.
Another thing that the Christian message can do is find a cultural practice and say, that is good, and it can affirm that. I think Sharon and I really met this when we were over in Jordan in terms of the hospitality of so many families and people that we met. Americans are funny people, okay? I mean, I spent about a third of my life outside of this country, so I get back to the States and I feel like this is kind of a weird place, okay? So I'll tell you some of the weird things that y'all do. A friend that you haven't seen in a long time calls you, and you want to hang out with them, and you meet at Starbucks. Why would you not invite someone to your home, right? It's just a really strange thing. Another thing that you do that's absolutely bizarre and incomprehensible is that you have gated communities. One of my students at St. Mary's was teaching there a while ago, and he said, gated community, isn't that like an oxymoron? Like, isn't community the idea that we're together and we're welcoming, but then we have a gate so no one comes in, right? Strange tribe, y'all. Well, hospitality is a beautiful thing that I think the gospel comes and it affirms it in the case of Arab culture. And heaven knows Arab culture has plenty of problems too, but that's a positive thing. Then finally, the Christian message can come and it can take a cultural practice and transform it and give it new meaning. And we know all about this, right? What's that main feast of the year where we celebrate all these pagan things, but they've been given Christian meanings?
Christmas.
Christmas, absolutely. And is there anything wrong with that? No, I love it. It's great. It is one of the great strengths of Christianity that it can take cultural practices and give them new meaning or redemptive meaning, right? Christianity, the Christian faith doesn't come in and say, we're just going to wipe everything out, right? And you have to do what we're doing. It can come in and say, the Christmas tree, interesting. Let's see what we can do with that, okay? Now, I want to be clear that cultures can be more or less transformed by the Christian message. They can be more or less redeemed, more or less sanctified. But that does still mean that no culture will ever be entirely sanctified. And of course, it has to be handed down from generation to generation to generation. Anybody know we have an English word, it's based on Latin, for to hand down? What's that called? To hand down something from generation to generation. This is handed down. This was my grandpa's. Belonged to my Uncle Mark. He passed away. It's mine. This ring.
Does it inherit?
Inheritance. That's good. That's not the word I'm looking for.
Keepsake?
Legacy.
Keepsake. Legacy. Those are all great. Tradition. Yeah, the Latin word traditio. It just means to hand something down from one generation to another generation. And I tell this to my kids. I say, we are living a way of life that has been handed down from generation to generation for 1,960 odd years, right? And it's a good way of life. And it's been handed down from generation to generation from Jesus and the apostles, even to us to this day. And it needs to be handed down to the next generation. Well, what are some of the implications of this message, of this way of looking at culture and religion for us today? Well, the first thing is that we have to ask a couple of questions. And these are questions that sometimes make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. Because what we're looking at with culture and religion, it has to do with the interpretation of Scripture. Because remember what I said, that we never find the Christian message pure and simple. It is always already being lived out. The Christian message as it's being lived out by the Jerusalem church in Acts is one way of doing it. The Christian message as it's being lived out by Paul's home church in Antioch is another way of doing it. The Christian message as it's being lived out by the church in Corinth is another way of doing it. Not a great way of doing it, right? I'm always amused when people say, oh, we're Christians, we're a church just like the Bible churches. And I say, well, I hope that you're not like the Corinth Bible Church, because I don't know any pastor who would want to pastor Corinth Bible Church. If we are aware of these things, We must allow the Christian message to challenge and transform our own cultural lens. When we read Scripture, and I love this because I don't preach very often, that's not my main work or job, but every now and then I do preach. And in some churches where I preach, they'll have an assigned gospel reading or a passage that they're working through a particular book in the Bible, or sometimes it's according to the church season. And so they'll say, you have to preach on this. And I like that, right? I like that because it makes me interact with that passage. A couple of weeks ago, I was preaching at a church, and the passage was Jesus saying, do not say peace. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And he talks about casting fire on the earth. Now, I will tell you, I would not have chosen that passage from the Gospel of Luke to preach on if I had not been compelled to. I love it because I have to say, how does this challenge my lens? How can I let Scripture, even though it's already within its own cultural matrix and cultural context, how can I let that challenge me, my worldview, and then of course the church? Although churches sometimes don't like being challenged. I don't know if you guys know this, but it's totally true. So, and then I want to leave you with this question. Maybe we can pick this up next week, and then we'll have some Q&A. What is the purpose of going to church? What is the purpose of going to church?
To fellowship with other believers.
Honor God.
Okay. Honor God, to fellowship. What if you say, like a good American individualist, I can honor God by going for a walk in the woods, right? Or fellowship, what if I say, you know what, I have 495 friends on Facebook, and I'm going to stay at home and fellowship with them.
But they might not all be believers.
They might not all be believers. Okay, well, I'm just going to fellowship with the 143 that are believers then on
There you go.
Facebook. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's a question. It's a question. I'm not trying to make light of these because fellowship and honoring God really are at the heart of it. But think about how you would answer that to an unchurched friend or a non-Christian friend or a Muslim friend. Why do you go to church? What is the purpose of this? What does the church give you, provide for you as a community that you can't get somewhere else in the world, right? So just keep that in mind, and we'll do a little bit of Q&A, and then we will wrap it up by 8 o'clock, okay? Any questions, comments, complaints? Yes, Pastor.
So in your travels, when we're speaking about the generality of Christianity in the world, what do the Christians in Muslim worlds think about American Christians?
Yeah, what do Christians in other parts of the world think about American Christians? Well, I would say first of all that a lot of Christians, especially in the Middle East, really feel forgotten. Another thing is that I think a lot of them feel like American Christians really get obsessed with things that are not of ultimate value. A good example of this would be some of the political process. Some Christians are, it's good, be a citizen, vote, I'm behind all that. But some Christians, it's really hard to figure out where their political allegiance is and their allegiance to God, where one ends and the other begins. So I've definitely heard that critique. And another one, since we're just being totally honest, in Israel-Palestine, a lot of Christians over there are very saddened and very hurt that Christians in America seem to be unapologetically and without thought supportive of Israel, when their own experience, this is what they would say, is that Christians should be more just and more reasonable in also looking at the Palestinian side of that argument. Good. Yes?
It seems that you're not really talking about the gospel as much as you're talking about the effects that the gospel would have on individuals and how that's been handed down traditionally. Because the gospel is man is sinful, God sent his son to reconcile man to God. That doesn't change from one culture to another.
It does. That's great. So there are three, let me give you 4 different axes to understanding the saving message of Jesus Christ in the gospel, okay? One of them is this one, which is what we call the forensic account, right? Having to do with justice and guilt and innocence before God. This is, in the West, extremely important. This goes back to Luther and John Calvin, who was a lawyer, surprise. This is after the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the way of understanding salvation, okay? But there are these three other ways that are just as biblical. And I'm not saying this one is wrong. I'm saying that this is the one that has been privileged in Western Christianity, okay? But there are three other ways. And we've seen all of these flourish throughout history in different places. One is based on shame and honor. The saving message, the saving gospel, is that you are a person who is despised and hated, but Jesus comes and he restores your honor. So you see that, for example, with a woman who was caught in adultery. Jesus takes someone who has no honor and who has no standing in her culture, and she restores her and elevates her to a place where she is a friend of the Messiah. Okay? So, but we're not people who think of honor. You want evidence for this, watch some daytime TV, right? You're going to get like, you slept with my grandmother, how can you do that, right? This is America, okay? We don't really worry about shame and honor anymore, which I think is something we need to think about. So that's another way. Another way is power and weakness.
Power and what?
Power and weakness. Power and weakness. After a lot of the European missionaries left Africa, they had made some converts. And then many of those African Christians, they were kind of running the show. They had a lot of challenges and difficulties. But one of the main ways that they would grow the Christian faith was by going to places and saying, the God of Jesus has power that your pagan gods don't. And I will show you this. If you read the prayers of St. Patrick of Ireland, no question about it, that's exactly how we operated, and that's how we converted probably half the population of Ireland. By going to the Druids and saying, you have your gods, I have God, who is the Father of Jesus, who is my Lord, and we're going to just duke it out and let your gods go against my God and see who's more powerful. Okay, so power and weakness is another way. And then finally, and I think this is the most important one today in postmodern America, meaning and meaninglessness. Most young people, most millennials, my students at St. Mary's or previously at UTSA, if you would say something like, you're a sinner, the sin separates you from God, you need an atoning sacrifice to get rid of your sin so you can have an everlasting life, they will say, that just sounds like gobbledygook, because I know that I'm a good person. I know that I'm a star. I always got trophies. Everyone told me that I can become an astronaut and a princess and a president if I want to. I may not know how to write a paper, but I've got a lot of self-esteem. Right? That's your American education. But if you say you don't have meaning in life, you don't have a purpose, something that's going to fulfill you in life, Jesus comes so that your life can have meaning, so that everything that you do, your work and your studies, can ultimately make a contribution to this kingdom of God. So this is all gospel, this is all good news, but these are four different axes, different ways of communicating and understanding the gospel. One of them is not more important than the other one, and the mature Christian, whatever their tradition is, will eventually come to understand and include all four of these. But all four of them have plenty of scripture behind them. Okay, one more question? Yes?
Have you been to these Muslim countries?
Yes,
And if
yes,
so,
absolutely.
how do you have church there? Is it all underground?
Well, it depends where you are, but no, I mean, we lived in Jordan, we lived in Nazareth, I've been to Turkey, and the churches there are not mostly underground. In some places like Saudi Arabia and Yemen, then yes, the church is underground, it's secret. But in many of these places, the church it's persecuted, it is stymied, but it is allowed to exist. In fact, I was very happy to read just yesterday that a brand new Catholic church was dedicated in Jordan. So I thought that's fantastic. I mean, do you know how hard it is to get permission from a government in the Middle East to build a new church? It's really, really hard.
Years.
So, yeah. So I was very happy to hear that news. I tweeted it, so if If you want to follow me on Twitter, at Dr. Duane Miller. So I've got one Twitter fan here. I love this lady over here, Shelly. Thank you for showing up. She's one of the people who influenced me to get on Twitter. Okay, great. Maybe one more question. Yes?
I'm curious why in India they wear white for funerals.
Why in India do they wear white for funerals? I don't know, Shelly, do you have any ideas on this one?
I think it's purity too. Just, it's interesting because recently I was in Toronto and there was a Sikh funeral that I attended. So half of the people were Christian, Sikhs who turned Christian, and half were still Sikh. And so the people who had been praying for the person before he died, they were praying Christian prayers, hoping that the family would become Christian. And so the room was full of colors. We had white and black. So the Christians said, well, we're going to wear this, and the Sikhs said, we're going to wear this. So
So the Christians wore black and the Sikhs wore white? But what do they mean in terms of purity? How do they associate purity with a funeral?
Well, maybe you are celebrating the purity of this person's life. Maybe you're desiring a purity for them as they hopefully come back in a better state of someone reincarnated to a better...
They're very superstitious.
Yeah. I'll end up with one little story here, just to show you just how bizarre and interesting this can be in terms of missions and culture and religion. In India, there were some missionaries who went there. This is back in the 19th, early 20th century. Missionaries who went there, and they were among one of the lower caste people, right? And they made a number of converts, and they said, okay, we are going to, we need a building now, basically. We have so many people, we need a building. And these missionaries were very sophisticated. And they went around and they said, we're not going to bring you one of our Gothic buildings like the ones we have in England, because that would be us imposing our culture on you, and we don't want to do that, right? What we're going to do is build one of these big, large kind of huts like you used to have that was related to your previous Hindu worship. And now the people said, no, we're not going to do this. We don't want one of those. We saw the picture of your nice Gothic English countryside church in one of your missionary journal magazine things, and we want that. And they figured out that they would have to quarry it, they'd have to bring the stone from far away, it would be more expensive, it would require a massive amount of work by the people because they were going to build it, and they said, we don't care. That's what we want. Why? Anyone want to guess why?
To be different.
To be different. Because it represented the newness of life. Their association with that the Hindu-style temple or building was negative because they were at the bottom. So they had a new dignity in their Christian faith that before they had not had. And the way that they could communicate that in terms of their building was by having one of those nice English churches. Well, thank you very much, and I hope to see you all next week.